I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition. In this episode of the Business of Intuition, we discover how a successful corporate real estate expert turned shaman changes the business world by harnessing the ancient power of intuition and shamanistic practices to spark innovation and creativity in the modern workplace. Rachel White and I talked about a variety of things in this fascinating conversation. For example, her transition from corporate real estate to shamanism. And what is shamanism? It's a set of tools and practices designed to help a person be more intuitive, and how to apply intuition in innovation practices at work. She also provided some excellent tips for how to identify and use intuition for the leader and also for a team in terms of how to actually improve meetings. Known as the Skeptical Shaman, Rachel White is an unusual spiritual practitioner. She blends more than 25 years of high-level corporate innovation and strategy experience with a deep knowledge of the world of woo. Rachel is making waves with the, quote, crystal hippie people, unquote, with their fresh, pragmatic take on spiritual development. Rachel is the host of the Skeptical Shaman podcast. She's the owner of TOTEM Readings. And in her Austin, Texas-based spiritual practice, she's the author and publisher of TOTEM Tarot Deck and the purveyor of TOTEM Flower Essences. She's also the author of TOTEM Readings Substack, an engaging community that challenges preconceived notions of what it means to be, quote unquote, spiritual. Rachel is married to her chef husband, Branford, and they take care of their wolf dog in beautiful Austin, Texas. Rachel White on the Business of Intuition. All right, so Rachel, it's great to have you on the show, hailing from a great city that I love, Austin, Texas. I know it's a bit warmer there today than it is here in Bend, Oregon, so enjoy that 50 degrees while we shovel out of a mega downpour of white stuff.
Well, we've put in hard labor before, being from Chicago. We know
yes,
what that feels
like. It's like.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, I'm really curious about you. You call yourself the Skeptical Shaman, and I want to get right into this because I think there's a lot for us to unpack here. First of all, for those who don't know, what is a shaman and why have you labeled yourself that?
So it's one of those words that I think it's overused, misused, but also I think it will take on different connotation depending on who you're working with. A classic shaman, the root of the word means wounded healer. So this is someone who offers some kind of healing, whether it's herbalism, energy work, plant medicine, even psychedelics, that helps you transmute illnesses, wounds, whether they be, literal or metaphorical, into what we would consider to be shamanic medicine, right? So basically someone who ushers in and midwives the process of transmuting those things. Shamans differ culturally, historically from other groups. There's a great Buddhist monk who's written incredible books. His name's Jack Bornfield. And he said the difference between a shaman and a monk is no one wants to hang out with shamans. They're crazy people. They set things on fire. And he's like, generally you're in Tibet at a monastery with the other monks and you see a shaman coming in a party. He's like, oh shit, here we go. So it's not that love and light dream catcher archetype. It's a little more trickstery, mischievous, getting energy moving, subverting things to get you to laugh at reality is a big part of it as well.
And you've been in business, you've had a successful career in sort of the typical definition.
And classically corporate.
Yeah. So have you always sort of identified as a shaman, as an intuitive person? And when did you shift your quote unquote your career towards the work that you're doing now, and why?
It was always around, but I never identified as a shaman. What's funny is a lot of C-suite leaders that I still talk to this day still call me a witch. They're like, well, you're a witch. Like, so that was sort of the catch-all. I never really hid my high weirdness, but I also didn't get serious about it until my mid to late 20s. And I was already well into corporate real estate by that time. And transitioning to this as a career was something I thought was never going to happen, ever, until I started watching what was happening in corporate real estate. So being in innovation and global strategy and COVID hitting, you look at it and you go, oh, this is like a perfect storm. And if I was ever going to transition, this is the time. So it was a fairly pragmatic choice of shamanism had grown in importance to me. Every weekend, this is what I did. We don't have children, my husband and I. I don't have like hobbies. This is the thing. I would see clients, I'd host meditation workshops. And I just thought it was the beginning of the end for corporate real estate and outsourcing in a lot of other industries. I saw rate of change going exponential and thought, well, this is a thing that feels more secure to me, not maybe financially, but just energetically. You could get your hands around it. I know how to do it. And I'd been building a practice and seeing clients off the side of my desk for 15 years. So when COVID hit and they thought another company was going to buy our company and acquire it, I just got golden parachuted out. And when the deal fell through, did not come, just kept going on my path and then moved from Chicago to Texas, also not on my bingo card for life. And it changed my whole business model, as you can imagine, having built it up. Chicago is a very small, big city. It was a very Chicago-centric business until we moved. And that was quite a pivot too.
So what is the relationship between your definition of shamanism and intuition? And how are they similar?
In shamanism, the whole practice of it, so all the meditation techniques, everything they do is all about cultivating and building a muscle memory around intuition and using that the way you would any other attribute. So your five senses, your logical, cognitive, conscious mind, bringing more of what we would consider the intuitive mind or other forms of intelligence online to give you just a bigger, better data set, frankly. So for me, I work a lot with clients trying to empower them to understand what their unique kind of intuition feels like and run with that and put in reps so that you get a really good sense of like a hand feel, right? My husband's a chef. There's a certain hand feel to foods, like when a pasta dough is going to make good pasta. There's a feel to knife skill. It just comes from repetition and working on that with them so they can self-serve ultimately. And you can have a religious faith system and still do shamanism. Shamanism doesn't care at all.
So there's got to be some similarities, though, between somebody who has a religious belief system and the process of shamanism and this muscle memory, if you will, that you're creating.
Maybe. It's different in a distinct way. So I went to Catholic school, and my biggest issue with that, not attacking anyone who's Catholic, everyone in my family's Catholic. I went to a Jesuit college too, so how bad could it be? Was you ask questions. So the skepticism piece. And they'd be like, it's cuts, kind of. Like, unless you found a really cool, Jesuit with a little bit of a buzz on, who was willing to have these open-ended, more philosophical, existential discussions with you. Whereas shamanism is anti-dogma. So your skepticism is welcome. You don't have to believe, you can believe. In shamanism, it's like you're going to get what you get. But
your point is, though, shamanism is not a belief system. Shamanism is a series of practices.
Yeah, it's like a structure that enables you as a human to explore spirituality. There's no set of shamanic deities. It varies.
Right.
There's shamanic cultures from every time period and continent on planet Earth. Yeah.
But you're using it almost like a toolkit.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. And then one of the outputs of that toolkit would be a refined or more accessible, intuitive knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Also, I would say, I go a little bit more mystical with it. It's like you interact with realms or dimensions that maybe the standard person who's not efforting to doesn't as often.
So let's go there for a second. So intuition, I'm gathering the way you define it, comes from the source of the individual and the perceptions and experiences and knowledge that they have accumulated. Mysticism, being a psychic, a medium, those other variations of this definition really is connecting with other sources.
Yeah.
Fair enough? Or am I getting it the way you would describe it?
I actually have never said it that well. So thank you.
Well,
And
okay. Thank you.
being an atheist and work, I could be your spiritual coach for a while. And all it's about is building your intuition. We could define that as a cluster of brain cells around the vagus nerve near your stomach. Works for me. I don't really like, I'm not trying to convert you, right? It's the opposite of that. But, different people within the shamanic framework doing, let's say, a shamanic journeying meditation. I had a client, she was very Orthodox Jewish, who interacted with Jesus and Aladdin, cartoon Aladdin, on a magic carpet in the air. She's like, what is that about? I go, I don't know. You're going to have to talk to them. So we leave things very playful and very open.
All right. So fantastic. So how have you been able to integrate this set of practices, if you will, with respect to being a shaman, with the outcome of one of them being intuition, into your life or even into business or helping others do that? Because I've always thought, hence the name of this particular podcast, and my curiosity has always been that I would be curious to see if we could get intuition out of the closet and into the boardroom, make it more accessible. And I truly believe that if you start allowing for and encouraging people's intuition, the whole person starts to show up versus some sort of siloed segmentation of them that's appropriate for that particular situation. That, you talk about engagement and inclusion. Well, let's teach intuition. That's the ultimate of all of that, right? It's really letting the mental and the physical and the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, all of them are firing, not just the pieces that are appropriate based on the mores of the team. So how do you work with people? What are some of the toolkit ideas that you provide people to help them develop this particular intuitive muscle and then apply it?
Amazing. And I didn't even think of all that. My main use, when I was in corporate, my main use for intuition was innovation and competitive advantage, which, that's not about bringing the whole person, but it effectively gave us an edge. It's asymmetric, intuition has that little magic dust on it. One of the things I did when I headed up what they called like knowledge and innovation was a test kitchen. And it wasn't a physical kitchen, it wasn't food. But we would meet, how often? Once a month. Everyone on the team had to present something, but it couldn't have any attachment to a pragmatic concern or even an outcome, just things that lit them up. And we left it very, very open. So sometimes people would see cardboard cutouts in an interactive marketing experience. Other times someone went to the art museum, in downtown Chicago and saw an exhibit. And, it was just us discussing the realm of pure ideas and things that we just gravitated to, which is very intuitive, right? Like, I like this. I don't know why I like it. Almost all of the things we discussed ended up in client pitches, in products and services. And I think it's because people weren't trying to be a thing or make it useful or kind of, how the brain and our society chokes things before they have a chance to kind of come to life. And just us discussing it in a way where no one's being judgmental, no one's measuring you, you're not going to get in trouble or get rewarded. We're just exchanging ideas here. It generated so many great ideas that we really used. And another thing is I was working on I'm trying to figure out how I could say this without violating an NDA. There was a large technology client prospect, and they had never gone out for outsourcing of these services ever. And it would have been a really big deal. And they're based in Menlo Park. And we were getting ready for this, pitch, which if you've ever worked in large sales, pitches last for 6, 8, 12 months. They cost millions of dollars. They involve dozens of people, there's an RFI, RFP, presentation, yellow pad, you have all these meetings. And it was hard and complex already. And in the middle of it, I had a dream that we created a board game that we played with the client. And so the next day, and I'm working with people at a company I'd worked with at a previous one. They knew I was weird already. And I just said, we're going to make an outsourcing board game. We're going to do this. And one of them really argued with me. But then I think he remembered, like, oh, she's got one of her things happening. He said, if you can pull a board game together in 48 hours and it works, we'll do it. We did it. Our CEO presented to their CEO and they played a game. And we made like bogus money for the competitors and their brand colors and stuff, like within this object. And the client loved it so much that he wanted extra copies. We genericized it and sort of turned it into a thing at other meetings that we would do or tout. And the guy who sort of initially argued with me, no one was more proud of that thing than he was. Every internal meeting for the next year was like, you want to see the board game? Like it became an urban legend. So there's a wow factor to just ephemera. And I think we're very dismissive of it because it doesn't seem useful. Like, why would you do that?
Right.
Things are getting wrong. Why are you trying to make it fun? You know, let's win.
So give me an example of like an exercise that you would take somebody through during these test kitchen monthly meetings to kickstart the conversation or the discussion.
Well, we would say to them, what was it that, really drew you? Like, what was the magnet? We would use that terminology. What was the magnet of this thing? Why is this?
Of what thing though? I mean, like, were they there to come prepared to
Yes.
present something that has been, interesting for them over the last 4 weeks? And
Yes.
like,
and intrigue or inspire them, right?
And that was the criteria.
Yes. And the only criteria.
Intrigue or inspire. It doesn't matter what it is.
What it is. It doesn't have to have anything to do with our industry. You don't have to make it useful for a client deck. You don't have to turn it. And actually don't do those things because those are sort of the idea killers.
It's very interesting that you mentioned this, Rachel, because I have this set of experiences and a belief that I have this idea, this construct that all things are aligned anyway.
Yeah.
Take a look at the human body. You take a look at the universe. You take a look at the relationship of cells. I mean, all these things are aligned. So it's almost like it doesn't matter where you start. It's just that you start.
Yes.
And then you will find as you explore it, its connection to the rest.
And it inherently just naturally becomes useful. You find a use for it. But I think we're so used to looking for the use case and then cost benefit analysis at the front end.
Right.
That we missed out on so many great opportunities. And I just had a thing happen yesterday. I wrote about this on my Substack. It blew my mind. I took some time off around the holidays and I had a really interesting, what we would call shamanic soul part recollection dream.
That's a mouthful.
It is. I know. Scientists did get in here in the 60s and 70s and it shows. But effectively it means calling back parts of yourself, like integrating something about you that's gone dormant, right? And in the dream there was a coyote and I was writing about this coyote. Yesterday on walks, and I have a German Shepherd Wolf hybrid from Germany. He's a big dog. We saw a coyote. I've never seen one here in Austin in our little residential neighborhood 4 times yesterday. And it didn't leave the neighborhood and it was alone. And it was just too weird because I'm writing about coyote. I see it and it's behaving unusually. And what's more is my dog didn't growl at it, didn't bark. And he has literally barked at a firefly because it scared him. Like he barks at squirrels and cats. And it was such a surreal experience. And I still don't know yet what the use case is, what the cost benefit analysis, what my margin in whatever parlance you want to use for this is. But I'm going to sit with coyote, right? I'm going to research it and let it kind of marinate a bit. And surely something comes out of it. I just have no idea what it is yet.
That's fantastic. That's really good. So tell me more about what the kind of work you're doing now. I get what you had done in the past, commercial real estate. You gave that great example of your monthly test kitchen, which I think is really an interesting idea. How are you working with clients now?
Well, I own a spiritual practice called TOTEM Readings, and I diversified a lot. So I'm realizing it's a long bullet list. So I've created a tarot deck that's on Amazon, on Etsy. We're creating another deck right now, the artist and I write on a Substack. So I try and communicate these esoteric ephemera of that in a pragmatic way for people, like your listeners, people who have, quote, real jobs. And they go, "Well, I'm not, going to Burning Man this year. So what do I care? How do you integrate this and make it useful for you?" And then I also work one-on-one with clients. So I do sessions, but I also do coaching work, which I resisted for a very long time. Because every time I met a coach in Chicago for a while, there's a certain archetype that I discovered early in the like when coaching really started getting going. And it was everyone I worked with at companies like Deloitte or JLL who decided and said out loud to me, "I don't want to work anymore." And they became coaches. And what was odd about it was they continued to articulate like, "Yeah, I don't want to work for a living, so I'm just kind of coaching." And so I developed a real negative stereotype of it. I think it was just the people I was around at the time, by the way, too. I've since met lovely coaches, like crucial people that have really helped others. My best friend is a coach. So, and now, but I do what's called spiritual transformation coaching. And they are overwhelmingly people with, that are doctors, lawyers, business owners, professionals who want to explore spirituality, like satiate their curiosity. And they know I'm kind of skeptical too. And I think they like that I'm not full woo. I don't do a lot of love and light, and I don't end emails with namaste. I'm like, yeah, that's it. And out of that came the podcast, because I just realized I have these incredible, interesting conversations with people all the time. And none of it's small talk. Nothing in my day now is small talk, which is a real gift for me, coming from a corporate outsourcing environment where it's 95% small talk.
Yeah. Understood. So somebody's listening in and they want to kind of say, I want to know more about my own intuition. I want to understand that. I want to even be able to experience it. What would you tell them?
My whole life have always found the easiest tool that helps with that is tarot cards. And they're not like witchy, weird, dark. Carl Jung, father of Jungian psychology, used them clinically with his patients. And it's because they have uniquely archetypal kind of figures in them. It serves as a bit of a Rorschach test, more specific, more, I think, rooted and grounded. And I would tell them, get a tarot deck, any one of them. There's a Rider-Waite deck on Amazon for $8. It's got images from the Middle Ages. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Pull a card in the morning. Don't look at what it means in the little booklet. Go about your day. When you come back, maybe before dinner, look at the card, read its meaning, and see how that manifested during your day. And that way you build your own language with the tarot cards, but also you're simultaneously developing this muscle for all these other areas of your life. It's just the most tangible one that I've come across. It's easier to ground and root in daily practice than like some of these more, transcendental meditation kind of things.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was even thinking of like, similar but not, around setting some sort of intention for the day, asking an open-ended question of oneself for the day, and sort of seeing what shows up to support the answer to that question, and how your intuition might help access that. I suppose not too dissimilar to a tarot card in a sense that you're sort of seeing how that particular image starts to reveal itself in meaning throughout your day, So I'm seeing some parallel, but I'm not trying to replace the tarot cards because I don't understand the way you do. I don't use them in myself, but I've had access to them before. But that's just something that I've thought about in terms of helping people sort of tap into that intuitive side.
And you'd be amazed what shows up. It's wild.
Yeah.
Like me writing about this coyote dream. And basically in the Substack post, like admitting, I don't know what this means. And then coyote showing up in this highly unusual way. I didn't set an intention, but I did not set an intention. It was on my mind. I was concerned with it. I wanted to get to the bottom of it. And here it is showing up again. And it's not that it's impossible. And it's not that there isn't such a thing as, what's the term? When you have your own bent on things.
Like a bias?
Thank you. Confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. Yeah.
all these things are real, but also in my case, statistically improbable. And so the way I explore these things is I go, how improbable is this? If it's incredibly improbable, I really pay attention. And it goes in the realm of magic to me, which I think is part of nature. I think, we're magic. And yeah, I have a client and we just had this conversation today. She's a doctor. And she goes, I really want to do this meditation, but I feel resistant. She's like, it's weird. I feel stupid when I do it. I'm like, what are you doing? All that stuff. And I go, yeah, just tell yourself it's an experiment that this crazy woman you paid money asked you to do. Mm-hmm. And she goes, what? I go, yeah, I don't care. It'd be whatever you need to do in here to just check it out. And without judgment and without a lot of attachment to all these other things. And I said, just be like, I'm spending money on this. I'm going to do what the crazy lady said. She started laughing. I said, it makes it easier. Trust me. I do that stuff. I'll meditate and I go, here I go. I have no idea what this is. It's an experiment. Yeah. And you almost feel like an observer of it. So you don't have to, I don't like this idea of surrendering fully and going, whatever it is, I believe, and you have to believe. Like, I don't think that's how that works.
Hence you're skeptical.
Yeah.
The word skeptical in your definition of yourself. Yeah.
That's fun for me. Because then when it keeps happening, you go, there's something to this. And I have this really concrete security with this being real and true in as much as anything can be. Instead of going like, did I sell myself a bill of goods? Or did that be in Bali? Like, wait, what did I just get into here? Uh-huh. And that's real intuition. It's equal parts curiosity and
so I have two thoughts running in my head at the same time. One is, are there some things that we should be careful of? Are there dangers out there? Yeah. Energies, for example, that, like, for example, my wife is very intuitive. One could even say at times she's psychic. She's careful about some of the stuff that comes her way because she says, that's nothing that I want. And there's good reason for it. Do you run into that? And what do you advise regarding that?
I'm a little not uptight, but I'm incredibly boundary conscious. And it's why I like intuition, because intuition it's a visceral, somatic, psychic, if you will, form of discernment, and I have a lot of clients that are cult survivors. They were in NXIVM or Scientology or smaller cults, and their intuition was screaming at them to get out. And that is very negative. All of that. Energetically, I will pick up on things, and this house gets lit up with incense and sage. I get an salt bath. And so I don't wrestle with it in my brain as much as I go, I don't like it. And part of me building my intuition is I don't need to explain to myself logically all the time why I don't like someone or I don't like something. I just don't like it. And that's become for me. And what turned that around for me was reading Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear, which has nothing to do with psychics. Have you ever read that book?
No.
He's kind of famous. He did security for actors and actresses. He lived with like Elizabeth Taylor. His stories are great, but he talks about and writes about the science of like when the body is saying, I don't like this, and how to tune into that and to always listen to it and to never be concerned about whether you're disagreeable or rude. Like you shouldn't, basic civility is a good thing, but listening to that intuition, that gut check is way more important.
So what have you learned? You've accessed a lot of information. Is there some sort of universal truths that you would say, whether or not anybody else believes it, but it sort of makes sense to you? Call it existential, call it whatever. But what is it that you would say, after these years of being on planet Earth and having these experiences, this is what I've learned?
It's funny. It's a cliche, but the more you learn, the less you know. There's really truth to that. I know it's a platitude at this point. Like you could get it hung on your wall from Target or something, but there's truth to that. And deeper than that, it's if someone's really deeply in their own work, doesn't matter what it is. They could be an atheistic neuroscience nerd. They could love Sam Harris and his app, and that's their thing. Or they could be full Jungian or, mystical and into Kabbalah. If you're really in your own practice, the last thing you have time or energy for is to tell anybody else how to do anything. And I think if more people filled the void, as Neil Gaiman called it, the God-shaped hole, with their own thing and got curious and explored this in their own lives, we would all leave each other alone. There wouldn't be any more of this managing each other's thoughts, feelings, beliefs that we see in our world today.
So I won't quite let you off the hook on the question. I get it that, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Get that. And in relationship to other people, I totally understand that. But what is it that you yourself in your own world says, I think this is, at least it works for you in your philosophy about life, right? Not anybody else, full of respect of the fact that we have different perspectives. But what about you?
I think ancient people, Sumerians or people who contributed books to, let's say, the Torah or the Bible or any of these ancient traditions, I don't think they were being cute and metaphorical. I think it was literal. I think people had literal experiences. And, when you look at ancient society and how hard it was to survive and you Occam's razor it, you're like, maybe they were writing about stuff they lived. And, because I've experienced some wild SHIT in the intervening years that shocked me and how literal it was, at times physical too. You're like, oh, well, anything's possible. And we don't know anything about what was going on then, unfortunately, except for what they told us. And I just think there's a patronizing quality to modern society. Trust me, I used to be a good, smug little atheist too. I would have eaten up Sam Harris in my early 20s, just loved everything about him and how superior, I was because I didn't believe in hogwash. It's very different now. And I don't look at ancient people as primitive at all. I think they were pretty advanced.
What do you mean by ancient people? You mean ancient civilizations and
Sumerian cuneiform tablets, the translations of that, or even parts of the Old Testament. Or I read in Hebrew, I read Kabbalah. I actually took it as an adult to study it. And you go back and you read it, and you're like, this is pretty sophisticated stuff. Like referencing things that we're only now coming into. By the way, and one of them, oddly enough, is AI, which is why I've been listening with earnest ears for your last few episodes that have come out. Where I'm wondering how new AI is, or if it's something that we make and destroy and make and destroy.
Are you saying that it was referenced a long time ago?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, they don't use the phrase artificial intelligence. Non-biological sentient life that has data, and it gets very, when you really get in the words and the translations themselves, instead of, the game of telephone through history, you go, the way they're describing this is, it reads like science fiction, except some of it reads like science now, which is intriguing to me.
So then how do you align yourself to time? You see it as linear, or do you see it as a big circle? Are you into string theory? Do you see that what you're tapping into is timeless? I mean, how do you access and put reference to things you learn?
I think time is linear. Like, I think things that happened 6,000 years ago happened 6,000 years ago. I do think there are cycles, and I think those cycles reveal repetitive patterns at times, like we go through epochs, if you will. Mm-hmm. In terms of string theory, I like it, but I'm also really getting into some other weird stuff. Like Eric Weinstein's theory of everything is very intriguing to me. And it kind of turns string theory in its head a bit. I like these guys who disagree with each other, and I like reading about it. For me, what I'm experiencing, who knows what's in a liminal temporal space, what dimension that is, right? So in terms of situating myself, I don't obsess a lot about past lives or concurrent lives. I think that's fun. One of my favorite podcasts, are you familiar with Rabbits? Terry Miles. It's about quantum, dimensional slip and playing a game with other selves. It's it's really
interesting.
Good. And chaos theory and being a strange attractor and Mandela effect. And those things are incredibly interesting to me. I just don't know. I don't know how it works. And it's one of those things where I go, I don't know how to build a watch, but I can tell you what time it is. Yeah. And I try to stick to my scope while being curious.
I just started reading a book called The Fourth Turning.
Oh, I've heard of this book.
Oh God. So those of you who haven't picked this up, pick it up. And there's a lot of videos out there about it, but the
It's a little,
short, yeah, the little cliff notes on it is basically the researchers had found out that over history that there were generations or 80-year spans broken down into 20-year segments. And the first segment was called the high. And the second segment was, I think, the awakening. The third was the unraveling. The fourth was crisis. And in our own generation, the end of World War II was the beginning of our new 80-year cycle. We are right now in the last cycle, the fourth cycle, which is that of chaos and the crisis. And so I only bring that up. If you read the book, you can go, they go back hundreds of years and you can see it history and go, here's when it was. And you can kind of go, this makes some sort of sense. I mean, there's some really good research around this. And of course, when we look at what's going on in the world right now, you can kind of go, yeah, I could feel that. I could sense that. What happened with the .com, I'm not .com, but with, the issues with 2008, which is the beginning of our current fourth cycle, and the pandemic and divisiveness and, all of the stuff that we would say, yes, I think this feels right that we're in some sort of crisis. Is this also a window and opportunity relative to the work that you're describing, intuitive work, shamanistic work? Is there something about this period of history that maybe on a much larger scale has a different window than it would at any other time in our lifetime? I've heard this being described like, yeah, the veil between the physical and the non-physical is the thinnest it has been in a long time. We've got some people who have been born into our families when we go like, oh my God, these kids are off the charts, what they're coming up with and saying and feeling and referencing. And I could talk about that for a lot. So I wonder if we're in a period of time where it's right for these kinds of conversations that you and I are having.
It is. And also, you're describing one set of cycles, which I totally believe in. But I think there are years, and what strikes me is just the other night I was reading a book. It's literally translations of Sumerian cuneiform tablets, because that's how I have fun, right? Like, I have no normal hobbies here. But they were describing 6,000 years ago. So right at the beginning of like what we would consider the book of Genesis, the creation myths and the flood, there was a war on a piece of land now known as Palestine. It was a war between gods and the humans that align themselves with those gods. And they were arguing over technology and who was in charge of what. I mean, you're reading this and you're like, God stuff aside, this is now. Like it's very striking. And the Hindus and the Jains believe that we are coming out of the Kali Yuga, and we're actually entering a cycle of enlightenment, the thinning of the veil. But, the worst bit of it, I think, is that moment of, oh my God, I've been in a cult. Whatever that is, however we've been collectively and individually perceiving reality, letting that go is going to be, I think clinical psychologists refer to that moment as like a personal apocalypse. Yeah, like, those moments of like my wife left me without a note, or, just those events. And we're primed for one of those globally in like literally this year, I think. And I don't get into that. I'm not on YouTube telling everybody to, prep or like, I think if the apocalypse goes sideways on us, there's only so much you could do anyway. I don't view controlling the variables as a possibility for us. But there's something happening enough where I feel not crazy to say, like, we're on the threshold for sure.
Yeah. And if you do subscribe to this, if it feels right to you, then the people who are here today become the heroes of tomorrow, in a sense. I mean, if you go into that generic kind of definition, if we're going to be entering into another cycle, going back to the reference to this book called The Four Turnings, well, that's 2025, 2028. Well, a lot of us are going to be around then.
Yeah.
So the seeds, the shoots that are coming out of the ground right now that later get grown into these major trees that we will be, using are starting now. So if you just look around, it's already beginning.
I think this is our Exodus story.
Yeah.
And, that was one form of slavery. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but effectively it took 4 generations for people to sort of lose their trauma, epigenetic trauma of being enslaved, and just finding ways to enslave themselves and each other again. And that was most big life struggle as he pulled his hair out. And he was like, I could have been an Egyptian prince. Why am I here? Like, this is wild. And you look at us now, I think there's going to be a very different awareness around what slavery was. I think a lot of it is financial. And I'm not anti-money. I'm actually quite the capitalist. I think I've been called an anarcho-capitalist. I hope that's a compliment. But
You've been called a what again?
Anarcho-capitalist.
Okay.
ANCAP. I believe in property rights. But just this, I think it's going to take a minute. It's going to be wild because there is a space that certain types of exploitation and abuse and coercive control take in your life. And when that's gone, it's weird.
Yeah.
What are you going to fill that with? And I think intuition, tapping into that, is how you start to get yourself out of those bonds of it.
Yes.
And
because it requires a certain amount of courage to listen to the intuition and then another kind of courage to actually act on it.
Well, it's a death. I mean, I think
it could be. Yeah.
You have to let your bad ideas die so you don't have to.
Yeah.
Either your bad ideas die or you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shedding.
And I think we're there collectively now, where it's like we've been, repeating on this mixtape for a while. And it's like,
yeah, it's time to move on. I want to go back to something very sort of linear in a way, just to sort of close us off here. We talked about businesses and we've talked about people kind of tapping into that intuition. You talked about tarot cards. I talked about setting the intention. If I were running a team, and I also loved your idea about the monthly, what was it? It had to do with a restaurant reference. What was that?
And I stole that
the test kitchen. Yeah.
From the greatest restaurant in the world, which closed, but it was in Copenhagen. And that's how they do the test kitchen. Yeah.
Test kitchen. So I love the test kitchen idea. Do you have any other type of ideas for a person who's running a team aside from a test kitchen activity that could help people become more innovative and, yes, probably intuitive in the process?
The big one, it's kind of specific. It's called Yoga Nidra meditation. Are you familiar with yoga?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's not religious or spiritual or really woo. It's a neurological reset that puts the brain in a very particular theta wave state that's really good for you. It's akin to like 3 to 5 hours of REM. It lowers your heart. It does all these amazing things. But I would have a friend come in and do this for my team when I was in corporate. Instead of team building, whatever, trust fall, that stuff.
Yeah.
We'd all sit quietly, and this is how I would end day-long workshops. Someone would facilitate Yoga Nidra and take us through a neurological reset. And I'll never forget the things that popped in people's heads and how free they felt sharing it. And as genuine team building, this one guy, Paul, shout out to Paul, goes, Rachel, at some point I could see little me and big me. And he was using this language, and Paul never talked. He was a graphic designer. And we had this, I was like, Paul, you might be Buddha or something. Like, he had this incredible insight, and he did something deeply Freudian with himself when he was in this meditative state. And other people started talking, and everyone was neurologically relaxed. I was like, yeah, let's end the day early, go home, go walk around. And for weeks, it's all anyone talked about was things that happened after they left that day, conversations they had. I think we're always so inflamed. We're in adrenal fatigue. Our nervous systems are just set to action, yang, hypervigilance, all of that.
Yeah.
That when you unwind a bit of that, you just get a very different side of people. Everyone was softer and braver. I thought, how corporate is. People don't want to say any of their real thoughts. And there's a reason they're not. But this was different. Like, they genuinely felt super grounded and embodied. And we actually did a meditation challenge, which I thought was funny, where we logged everybody's hours of meditating on different teams and made it a competition. You could do any kind you wanted. Of course, get insight timer, get an app. And it's amazing. Everybody's quality of life was better. Their work product was better. And the biggest shift I noticed was there wasn't this propensity for collective suffering. I don't know if you encountered that, where everybody bonds through suffering. Like I pulled an all night too, and
oh, me too. Yeah.
in the gym for a month, and you're like, that was gone.
Yeah.
From
So just tell me again, what was the exercise at the end of the day?
yoga
You
nidra.
had them. So what's the process and how long does it take?
It's about a 30, 40-minute meditation. And I had a yoga teacher come in and they just orally do it. It's a guided meditation, but you can get an app. There are podcast episodes free. You could just download them, play it on a speaker in the room. And it's just someone taking you through, your left index finger, all 3 fingers, different hemispheres of the brain, hemispheres of the body. And none of it's woo, none of it's even in Sanskrit. You're not going to get in trouble. And it's a different gear, I think.
Great idea. Well, Rachel, how can people follow your work and follow you?
TOTEMReadings.com. I am passively aggressively on social media, on Instagram at TOTEMRage.
Passively aggressively. That's interesting.
I
on
don't,
again, off again.
well, it's more like I'm always there, but I'm letting it know I don't like it. If that makes, it's like, who's afraid of Virginia Woolf every day with me on Instagram. The energy drains me. If it were really good dialogues with my clients, I would probably abandon it. And then the podcast is called The Skeptical Shaman. And we talked to everybody. I had a Catholic exorcist on, who was played by Eric Bana in a movie about his life, by the way, which is funny.
Wow.
That. And, practicing witches, Ayurvedic health practitioners, cult survivors, someone who was deep into Nexium, who's now, a therapist and working with people. And so we're all over the place. The key theme of it is be curious, be spiritual, but stay skeptical, because there are all kinds of things out there that would love to capitalize on your curiosity.
Yes, right. Rachel, fantastic conversation. Thank you for showing up. It's been a lot of fun.
And thank you for your podcast. I really have been listening. I think AI is a very important topic, and people who study intuition or talk intuition, they just don't go anywhere near it. So thank you. Yeah,
well, just to finish that thought, I think that there's a tremendous application for AI. I use it maybe even every day to some degree or another, but I just don't think you can replicate the intuitive part of an individual. And I kind of wonder, like, we should almost take a laundry list of what are those undeniable human characteristics that we choose not to automate, that we choose not to become robotic. And let's hold on to that moralistically, but also just because it's who we are as human beings. And I do think that we kind of become a reverse anthropomorphizing things, whereby we now are assigning human characteristics using technical terms. And we have those expectations that we have to respond to an email as fast as Google does a query. So, I think there's a lot to be said for hanging on to that intuitive part without throwing out some of the useful aspects of AI.
It should serve us, just
Absolutely. Exactly. It's a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.